In this lesson, we'll learn different methods for selecting items and components in Modo. So we've got our model. We want to begin to select some objects. So with item mode turned on, we can just left click on the object that we'd like to select, and you can see the active item becomes highlighted. Alternatively, we can also use the middle mouse button to drag a lasso across our objects, or the right mouse button as well. You'll notice that if any part of this lasso extends over an object, that object will be selected. So even if it just barely touches it. So thinking about Cinema 4D, this would be as if you had tolerant selection turned on. We'll see that when we go in and select components a little bit better. Okay, so the default method of selecting is the lasso. So you can see it's sort of a free form shape. So it's a little bit different than the rectangle selection in Cinema 4D, the select rectangle. But you can change that if you want to. So you can go into select, lasso style. We can change this to a rectangle. And here we can use that if we'd rather use that sort of a shape, depending on what kind of object we're working with. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to a lasso. So right now we're in item mode. So we're just going through and selecting individual mesh items. But let's say we want to start to select some components. So in order to do that, we need to be able to select the item that we're going to be using. And then we're going to go to component mode. So let's select the legs. I'm just going to hit Shift A, kind of move up a little bit closer. Let's go to Polygon mode. And now let's take a look at some of the different ways we can start to select some polygons. So we can come in and click on the particular polygons that we want to select. So like a live selection in Cinema 4D. If we want to add to the selection, we can use Shift to add to our selection. If we want to subtract from our selection, we can use Control to take those polygons away. If you want to select the entire polygon shell, not necessarily everything within the mesh item, but everything that's one enclosed object, you can double click on our leg. So you can see that that's not necessarily selecting everything, it's selecting that entire piece of geometry within that mesh item if we just double click on that. Okay, if you want to drop a selection, you can click off in the view, or you can hit the escape key to drop your selection as well. Keep in mind here in Modo that if you don't have anything selected, then everything is selected. So right now, all the polygons that exist inside of this particular mesh item are selected. If we were to run a tool that works on polygons, it would act on all of the polygons, unless we have some sort of selection defined, in which case it would then just act on the selected polygons. Now, the lasso works a little bit differently based on the shading that you have going on. So right now we've got a shaded mode turned on. And let's use the middle mouse button and the right mouse button to create a lasso around some polygons. So let's use the middle mouse button first. I'm just going to draw across these faces. And you can see it's actually selecting not only the faces that we can see here, but also the ones all the way around the back. So the back faces. If I use instead the right mouse button and draw the same lasso, you can see I get the same polygons here on the front, but I don't get any of the polygons on the back. So depending on which you use, the middle mouse button or the right mouse button will determine if you're selecting all the way through your object. And this is in shaded mode. And by default, this behavior changes, it reverses if we were to go to wireframe. So now in wireframe, if I use the middle mouse button, you can see I'm only selecting the front, whereas the right mouse button will allow me to select all the way through. So that's something to keep in mind if you're going back and forth between different shading methods. If you don't want that to behave that way, you can also change that. So in order to do that, we'll go into the preferences. And we're going to come down to right under where we did the remapping. We're going to go into selection. And let's choose ignore shading style. So now we're in shaded mode. Middle mouse we're selecting through. Right mouse button we're not. If we go to wireframe now, it stays the same. So middle mouse all the way through. Right mouse button just the front. So it's up to you whether you want that to, how you want that to function, but by default that's what it's set as. So just to be aware of that. So there are also ways to very quickly select groups of components. So for instance, if we're in edge mode and we just double click on an edge, that'll select that entire edge loop. We can do the same thing here, and you can see it comes actually all the way back and around. So you could shift, double click to select multiple edge loops, or if you wanted to kind of go this way and select a bunch of edge loops, you could do that as well. That's just by double clicking on that. If you want to do the same thing with polygons, you can click on a polygon, click on its neighbor, and hit the L key, and that'll select an entire loop. You could do the same thing this way. So hitting the L key will allow you to select a loop of polygons. Now if you want to do a pattern instead, all you have to do is start the pattern. So click here, and then we'll skip one, shift click the next one, and then we'll just hit the up arrow, and it'll extend that pattern each time we hit that arrow until it gets all the way back around. So that's a really quick way to select an alternating pattern. If you want to do that, you can also, it doesn't have to be every other one. You could select this one and skip two, and it'll do the same thing there. So a really nice way if you need to create or model on an object and you need to create a repeating pattern along that object with what you're doing, you can define that pattern and just very quickly with the arrow keys extend that pattern all the way around the loop. And we can also change what component we want to select using the middle mouse button. So right now we're in polygon mode, but if I come over a point and I middle mouse click on it, we jump right over into vertices. So that's kind of a quick way you can switch between your different components as well, just middle click on a particular component. Also, let's take a look at this. So if I select these 4 polygons and then I go to edge mode and I select this loop and then I go to vertices and I select these and then we go back, you can see that those different selections are saved. So if you go back to each component, whatever you had selected is going to be saved there. You can also convert selections. And so if we use the Alt key, so we have this polygon selection, we'll use the Alt key. I want to convert that to an edge selection. So Alt, we'll hit that button, and you can see that now those edges that were involved in that polygon selection have been selected as my edge selection. So Alt will allow you to convert whatever selection you have into a new component. So we could convert that into points as well. And then if we had a tool we wanted to run on those points, we could do it there. I also want to talk just a minute about implicit selections. So the idea with implicit selections is that, for instance, if we have these polygons selected here, we not only have the polygons selected, but implicitly we also have these edges selected and the points. So that if we were to run a tool that is a point-based tool, it's not going to error out saying that, oh, you have something wrong selected. It's going to say, okay, I kind of understand. You have polygon selected, but I'm just going to use the points that are associated with that instead. So with vertices, there's really only points. Okay, those points are selected. With edges, you have an edge selection, and then you implicitly have a point selection. So that would be these 3 points here. With polygons, you have the polygons themselves, and then you implicitly have some edges that are associated with those polygons selected and some vertices selected. So if we were to go in and, for instance, go to vertex and do vertex beveling, you can see it's happening on all of those points. It didn't give us any kind of problem with just having polygons selected or wanting to be in vertex mode or anything like that. It understood enough to say, okay, I'm just going to use the implicit selection to run the tool on. So keep in mind that you can do that. And when you do select components, you are going to have those implicit selections as well for the other components that you may have available. All right, so that's a look at different kinds of selections here in Modo and selection types. The next thing we're going to talk about is our action centers and fall off. So action centers are going to allow us to change the way that the pivot behaves, the way it's oriented, and then fall offs are going to allow us to change how the tools behave over the surface of our models. It's going to give us a really flexible way of working. So let's take a look at that next.